Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for having me. I didn't realize I don't have real pockets, they're all fake. So thank you to Joanna for creating this contraption. I appreciate it. My name is Rinku. Sutradhar. I am a biostatistician and a senior scientist at ICES and associate professor. I teach multi-state models at Carolina. So thank you for having me. Today I'm going to talk about repeated outcomes and how they appear quite as often in when we're looking at health service utilization. And I'm going to talk about the use of recurrent event models for examining these repeated outcomes. So I guess the first question is, many of you may already know this, but what is recurrent event data? So let's go back to the simple setting of survival data. So survival data is when we basically have individuals that we're following, let's say, and we start following them from some common origin of time. And from that time, we follow them forward until the occurrence of a single type of event. So in this example, I'm following individuals from time 0, which is the time of diabetes diagnosis, and I'm following them until the time, let's say, of their first ED visit. So basically, that T is a non-negative, it's a random variable. I'm looking at time to that event. It's an event time, a failure time. And again, and then the main thing is I'm going from some well-defined origin of time, time 0, to looking for that event to occur. Now let's kind of expand that and go into recurrent event data. So here I have individuals, and they're actually experiencing repeated occurrences of a single type of non-fatal event over time. It has to be non-fatal, right? Because then obviously it can't happen over and over again. So back to this example, we have individuals, again, diagnosed with diabetes, that's time 0. We're following them, and we're examining ED visits for these patients. So for example, T1 would be the time to the first ED visit, T2, time to second, T3, T4, etc. So T1, T2, all the way through, these are also random variables. They're known as the event time. And they represent, again, time from some well-defined origin to the occurrence of this event of interest, multiple events of interest. So here are a few examples, and I just pulled this from there. This example comes up quite often when you start exploring recurrent event data. It's open source. This is looking at time of replacement for a defective part in an automobile. So really, I have a bunch of automobiles. That's my ID on the y-axis, and all the dots represent the day at which some part has to be replaced. Okay, so you can think of them as time to replacement, so time to recurrent events. Another example, here's another car data. I'm looking at warranty claims on 15,775 vehicles. Same thing on the y-axis, I have each of the car IDs. I'm following them over time. Age is actually the time scale here, and every time there was some type of warranty claim on the car, there's a dot that shows up. So really we're looking at time to these warranty claims. And one of the objectives here was to understand, is the rate of claims higher for vehicles manufactured in a particular city, city X versus city Y, or manufacturer X versus manufacturer Y, as an example. And time is the, age of the vehicle is the time scale. Okay, so what about with administrative data? So I work at ICIS, and we have access to a lot of great admin data. So here are some examples of the use of recurrent events in our data. So this particular publication, this looked at patients who have survived cancer and are still visiting the survivor clinic. And we wanted to know if attendance to a survivor clinic, if that actually decreases your rate of ED visits in adult survivors of childhood cancer. So the main exposure is whether or not they're actually attending the clinic after they're a survivor, following them forward to look at ED visits over time. So ED visits are the outcome. Another example, in this paper we looked at screening, so periodic mammograms among women aged 50 to 74. We want to know if seeing a primary care provider, perhaps they're encouraging you to get screened, if that increases your rate of mammograms over time. In Ontario, through OBSP, you no longer actually need a referral from a family physician, so you can actually get a call or get a letter, go in and get your mammogram done. So we're interested in, whether physicians still have an impact on screening uptake. That's what this paper is about. This paper just got published this year. This was looking at opioid prescribing rates. So we wanted to know if survivors of cancer, compared to individuals who've never had a previous cancer diagnosis, if they have a higher opioid prescribing rate compared to the matched controls. Basically in this example, survivorship, think of that was the exposure essentially, and then all of the opioid prescriptions we had, those are the recurrent events. So that's another example. Okay, so maybe let's talk about some typical objectives and methods in the analysis of recurrent event data. What exactly, what kind of things we really want to answer most of the time, and what are the usual methods that we can go about trying to address these questions. So we want to understand and characterize event occurrence. So we want to understand the patterns by which these events happen over time, or let's say the probability. If I just got diagnosed with something, what's my probability of having 10 ED visits in the next 5 years? Right? I'm just making this up, but basically number of events over a particular period of time. What's my risk? Explaining individual to individual variability. So trying to understand the relationship between characteristics and the rate by which events occur. Now, these characteristics can be fixed, meaning that you're just gathering them at baseline and trying to understand the association between these characteristics and the rate of the outcome. Or these characteristics could be a function of time, so they're changing over time. And you still want to understand, at any given time, if my profile is X, Y, Z, what is my rate of the outcome compared to another person with a different profile? Understanding variation in the rates in your cohort. And then also prediction. So these are a few things that we usually want to look at when we have recurrent event data. Now, the typical way, at least in our world, I'm talking about the health and vid world, when people have repeated events, is to do something like a Poisson analysis. And why do people do that? Well, it's very easy to implement. But what does it actually mean? Let's just talk about that a little bit. So in this example, if you think of, let's say we're going back to the ED visit example, if you think of the number of ED visits following a Poisson distribution, right? That's what the Poisson regression would mean. So this is kind of what the Poisson distribution looks like. Yes, it can account for the fact that some individuals maybe are just followed for 1 year, some for 6 months. It can account for varying lengths of follow-up. So that's not a problem. But there is an issue. The underlying assumption is that the rate of events that occurs at an equal rate, an even rate. So for example, if an individual has 3 events over 12 months, the underlying assumption is the event rate is constant, so basically they have an event every 4 months. That's the underlying assumption. Yes, you can try to tease that out a little bit, but the actual rate that you're modeling is constant. Okay, so keep that in mind if you're thinking of Poisson regression or negative binomial regression. Okay. So then we proceed to recurrent event analysis. The reason we do that is because in reality, events don't occur at a constant rate. Right? I don't have an ED visit every 3 months or every 4 months or every year exactly on the dot. Right? The lag time is different. There's a variation across patients are different. So we really want to account for time non-homogeneity, and that's the key. So recurrent event analysis is about accounting for time non-homogeneity. So here is, I'll give you a tiny bit of notation, that's it. Here I have, let's say, N individuals. This is individual I, this is, let's say, their example trajectory. I'm following them from some time 0, which is their time of diabetes. And they experience, the I'th individual experiences NI events. And why do we say NI? Because each individual can have a different number of events. So I is specific to the I'th individual's events, right? So in this example, NI is equal to 4. So their events, we know their events. I, again, grab their data. I see that they had ED visits at T1, T2, T3, and T4. Okay. Now, NI of T, because we need a little bit of notation, we're trying to understand these models. Notice how NI of T, this is a count. This is the number of events that the IF person experiences from the time 0 to T. Okay, so notice how NI of T is a function of T, right? Because we need whatever we're looking at to be a function of time now, because we want to be able to account for the fact that the rate is a function of time. So we define this count as a function of time. So that means that, and what it's doing is, at every point in the timeline, right, it's actually updating, right? you can update what's happening in each person's trajectory. So for example, in this given t, ni t is equal to 0, because so far they've had no events, right? And let's say now I'm moving t forward a bit. By this time, this person, the number of events they've experienced is 1. Let's say t is over here, the number of events is 3, right? But you can think of this along the continuous time scale. So what does this mean? This actually means that the count, we're gathering history on these individuals as they have events. And this history, the number of events that happen over time, and everything that happens from time 0 moving forward, we call that a counting process. Okay, so we're counting what's happening and we're keeping track of what's happening to these individuals over time. Okay. Now, what happens is after we get the data, we understand the counting process. What do we actually try to model? Well, we use that counting process to model this. It's called the conditional intensity function. So this is the instantaneous rate of an event occurring at time t, conditional on the person's history up to that time. Okay, so that's what's really important. So it's a rate. It's about how quickly the event is happening at any given time, conditional on my history up to that time. Now, this may sound familiar, and this is my question, does this function sound somewhat familiar? If you think of a hazard function, what is a hazard function? That's also a rate. It's the instantaneous rate of experiencing the event at a time t, conditional on not experiencing by that time yet. So the fact that you're event-free up to time t is the rate of having the event in the next instantaneous moment of time. So this is the key here, right? In both of these are about rates. In both cases, recurrent event analysis, you're modeling a rate. Even in a survival analysis, you're modeling a rate. But it's the history that matters. In a recurrent event analysis, multiple events could have happened to you in the past. You're keeping track of that. And in survival analysis, right, there's actually no event that could have happened because you're only looking at one event. So in a survival analysis, you actually are counting for history. History's in there. When I say conditional on the fact that no prior event has happened, the event has not happened yet. That's what the hazard function means. The hazard function is a conditional intensity function. Yeah. Any questions? Like, feel free to. I don't need to wait till the end. All right. Okay. So fundamental. Sorry, did you have a question? No. Okay. Fundamental framework for recurrent event analysis. So how do we usually model that transition intensity function? There are two main ways to do it. You can think of modeling based on counts, on the event counts. You can also think of modeling based on gap times. So modeling the space between the events instead. Okay? Today, there's a huge body of literature on every single one of these and on these little pieces of every single one of these. But today I'm going to talk about event counts, because that's usually the go-to for us, especially with our kind of data. I'm going to talk about the non-parametric approach, the Anderson-Gill approach, if you've heard of that, and the PWP approach. All right. So the framework that we use, whether it's an event framework to model or the gap time framework, that really depends on the question at hand. In our case, typically for event data, we're looking at ED visits. We're not really interested in the gap time. We're interested in the rate by which events occur. There are papers that look at gap times when the events are rare. So I've seen papers that look at sport injuries among athletes, and there they're actually interested in modeling gap times. That's an example there. Okay, so let's go, remember, for the count approach, I was talking about the non-parametric way, the Anderson-Gill, the PWP. Let's talk about the non-parametric approach. This is a data-driven approach, right? I'm not making any assumptions about the data. And by doing so, I think it's something that's kind of important to me, and this function that's important to me is actually the mean function. It's called the MCF, mean cumulative function. And we actually use this a lot in recurrent event data analysis. One of the first things that we'll do, because what it does is it actually computes, it calculates the rate at which the events are happening as a function of time and gives you that step function. I'm going to show you an example. So it's estimating the mean number of events that occur over the interval 0 to t. And I give you an example. So this is open source data. It's data on tumors in rats. Now it consists of 48 rats. Some have been randomized to some type of treatment, and the others are controls. They're all followed for 122 days. So I have treated rats and control rats, and I'm looking at time to tumors. So that's what the recurrent event is here. In this plot, basically, every single dot represents when they had a tumor. Okay, and the x-axis is the days from randomization. Okay, again, open source data from Gale in 1980. And if any of you use R, it's actually available right in R, so you can actually grab it and then play around with it. Okay, so in this data, what's the objective? They wanted to know if getting treated would decrease your rate of tumor occurrences over time. So what's the statistical translation for me? I want to understand the mean cumulative function. So over time, what does it look like for the treated group and what does it look like for the control group as an initial crude analysis? Now, of course, I can compute the mean tumors over time. I can just actually look at, like, for example, in the treated group, I can take all the tumors that happen in the treated group and divide it by the number of rats that were in that group. But that's a very crude estimate of the rate of the event. Now, if you use the MCF method, here's an example of what it gives you. So the x-axis here is days from randomization. The y-axis is actually the mean cumulative function. So it's the estimate you're trying to gather. Now, what is this telling us? What do we notice? We notice the black is the exposed and the red is the control. The step function actually tells you when these events are happening and what the mean is at that particular point in time. So at any given time, what you see is that the red line is always greater than the black line. And what that means is that by that moment in time, the mean number of events that's expected is higher for the control group always than for the treated group. And you see that throughout the time. It kind of starts off similar, but then it really does diverge. So this is called the mean cumulative function. It's a very nice plot. It's one of the first things you want to do when you're doing a recurrent event analysis. It gives you a good sense of what your raw data looks like. Okay, so that's the, yes.
Sorry, Rinku. I'm just going back a minute. So the non-parametric approach, presumably like most other non-parametric models, will not allow you to adjust the covariates.
Exactly, that's right. So what I did here is I really just stratified the treated group and the control group, and I looked at the mean cumulative function.
And the statistical test that will give you standard inferential statistics.
You can get a variance on this, yeah,
curves.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
What does the red-D mean?
Sorry?
Red-D.
The red. Oh, go back.
Yeah. For red-D, what does that mean?
Oh, per rat day. Oh, because I did this, oh, I see. Because some rats could have died. So I did this by person days. I think it was per rat days. That's why. Okay, so we talked about the non-parametric approach. And now this is the next approach, which is the Anderson-Gill approach. So the Anderson-Gill approach actually doesn't distinguish the first event from the second event. It doesn't care about the ordering of events. You know, is the second ED visit more important than the first? That's questionable. Maybe it is for some, maybe it's not in another context, but that's what this model does. It doesn't distinguish the first from the second. There's no ordering in mind. So basically, individuals are simply at risk of experiencing the event until they're censored or until they're optimal, whatever it is, until they try. Okay. Now, in the PWP framework, that's a little bit different. Here, it does distinguish between the first and second and third, etc. events. And so because the ordering is important, it actually means that the person is not going to be at risk for their second event until they experience their first event. Like, I know that sounds really obvious, right? But you have to model that. So the model knows that that's obvious to you. And so what the PWP does, if you think of it this way, it's actually saying that you're only at risk of the first event initially. Once you're there, maybe your profiles change and now you're at risk of another event. Okay? So that is the PWP model. Okay. Now, I have a few, yes.
Sorry, are you going to talk about any of the assumptions of the Anderson-Gill model compared to the non-parametric model that need to be satisfied to decide if it's an appropriate model?
Yes, so I didn't go into all the covariates. So in all of these, for these models, the reason for this is what you're still modeling is the transition intensity function. So that rate is on the left-hand side. Think of it that way. Yes, all your covariates are on the right-hand side. Now, in the Anderson-Gill model, because it doesn't care of the ordering of events, it's not going to give you a different set of profiles. It's not going to give you a different set of data estimates, association estimates for each transition that happens. Because it doesn't care about the order. It still assumes that the relative rate is constant, so that proportionality assumption is still there. you can take it, you can tweak it by adding interactions with time, but that still applies. Think of it as an extension of the cost model. Perfect. In the PWP model, it's actually really interesting because these models, you can actually get for every transition that happens. So let's say I'm looking at age sex, right? Something really simple. It's possible that age and sex is associated with the first transition, but it's not associated with the second transition. Maybe it only matters for what happens in the immediate future, not the ones that are later on. If that's the case, then you actually want a different association parameter estimate for each transition that happens, right? And the PWP is able to give that to you. Okay.
So how different is that from a multi-state model?
Not very different at all.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. In this model, it even has a different baseline hazard function for each transition as well. Yeah. Yes.
So does that mean that you can also adjust for competing risks in some way with this model?
Okay. So no, not yet. No. So then it becomes a multi-state model. So if you have another arrow that goes from absorbing state at the end, that becomes a multi-state model. These are only for events, assuming these events can happen repeatedly over time. There's no absorbing state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a set trick event?
Yes, absolutely.
So what is the advantage of using that instead of a multi-state model?
I think the multi-state model does a better job of accounting for history. So in a lot of these models, when people implement the PWP, so in a multi-state model is when you have a lot of different states and people can just transition back and forth between states, and the history is captured really well. So basically, you know at any given time, what's my intensity of moving to the next state, conditional on everywhere else I've been in the past, right? Here, what they do is, at each state, it's like renewing the process, starting again. But you don't have to do that, right? So you can make this into a multi-state model if you want. But that's typical PWP. It's like a renewal process.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so preparing data. The reason I know that, I'm not sure how many people here actually touch the data and manipulate the data. I have a couple of slides on this only because the data frame is really important to structure your data properly because it's very different from setting up your data for like a cost analysis, right? So I'm going to give you an example here where the event obviously happens multiple times over the timeline, but also the covariate changes over time. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how to structure the data for that kind of setting. So in this particular example, I'm going to give you the follow-up time is going to be unequal for the patient. Some are going to be right-centered. The covariates can be fixed or time varying. And yeah, the outcome again in this hypothetical example is ED visits among patients diagnosed with diabetes. So let's just look at, three patients, hypothetical case. Patient 1, they had ED visits on these days, 12, 14, and 100, and then they're censored on day 344. They never received any treatment. Okay. Patient 2, they had ED visits on 55 and 63 days, and they were censored on day 180. They started their treatment on day 60, so not at time 0. And then you have a third patient. They're actually released from the hospital on day 16, then ED visit on day 20, and then they're censored on day 65. And they started treatment on day 45. Okay. So a lot of things are happening here. I'm going to go through them with you. Now, here's what you need to do. You need to create the following vectors when you're structuring your data. ID is the person's ID. Start and stop. That reflects the interval of time over which you are observing these individuals and the actual transitions that happen during those intervals. I'm going to go through it in the example. Status reflects what happens at the end of that interval. Enumerate is just basically counting which event they're at risk for. And then treatment is the actual treatment covariate. So are they on treatment or not? So let's do patient 1. So notice, remember the patient had ED visits on day 12, 14, 100, and then censored on day 344. So they actually have 4 intervals of time that we need to actually put into our data frame. The first interval goes from 0 to 12 because I know an event happens at 12. Then from 12 to 14, 14 to 100, 100 to 344. So 4 intervals reflecting all the change points. Okay. Status represents it's a 1 if there was an event at the end of the interval. It's a 0 if they were censored at the end of the interval. Enumerate tells me which event they're at risk for, and the treatment is the treatment indicator. So status is obviously going to be 111 because we know that they had an event at day 12, 14, 100. At day 344, they're censored, so it's 0. Now, immune tells me the first line, at time 0, they're at risk of the first ED visit. After they've had their first one, they're at risk for their second one. The NUM is actually needed if you use the PWP model, okay? Because you're keeping track of the ordering of the visits. All right, that's patient 1. They're pretty easy to put into a data frame. Patient 2 is a little bit trickier. So patient 2 obviously has multiple outcomes, but they also have a treatment covariate that's changing over time. So patient 2 has 3 events. Patient 2 has 2 events on day 55 and day 63. They're then censored on day 180, but they had a change in treatment status at day 60. So I actually can't just have 3 lines for this person, because the lines are just not about when the events happened. The lines are about any point in which there was a change in either covariate profile or outcome profile. Okay, so for this particular person, their first segment of information is 0 to 55. And then their next segment is actually 55 to 60. Because at 60, they had a change in the event. They had a change in their treatment status. Then you go from 60 to 63, and 63 to 180. So notice how at 55 and 63, the status is obviously 1, because that's when they had their ED event.
The keeping track of the ID,
yes,
will at some point have an effect? Like, is there a random effect kind of approach to that, or is this?
Yes. So I did not. Yes. So you need to account for the fact that now you have multiple observations per person, and you do, right? At any type of recurrent event model, you have multiple events that happen, and you need to account for that. Yes. So you can use a frailty term. I did not go into that here.
But
yes,
the basic PWP includes some correlation.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so here's what's really important. So even though, notice when the treatment status changed, it changed to day 60. At 60, they started treatment. What that means is, this is the number one mistake that most analysts I find make, is that they actually, at the interval of 55 and 60, they assign the treatment indicator to 1 at that point. But that's not the case. They started at day 60. During that interval of time from 55 to 60, they weren't on treatment. Okay, so the indicator is still 0. It's right after that point in time that it changes to 1. So this time varying covariate concept and when to change the indicator is really, really important. Now the third person, this is interesting, they're a little bit different too, because they were released, they were diagnosed with diabetes and then released from hospital at day 16. Now tell me, if you're in the hospital, can you be in the ED? Usually not, right? So we actually want to take that time out. So it's called a delayed entry. They're entering at a later point. So actually, if you notice, their first start time is not at 0. It's actually at day 16, because now that's when they're now at risk for ED visits. So their intervals are 16 to 20, because at 20 they had an ED visit, 20 to 45 because that's when they had a treatment change, and then 45 to 65 because that's when they were censored. Okay. Okay. So lots of concepts here. Obviously, repeated outcomes, the time-dependent covariance, and when to actually tweak that the indicator for that, and the third concept is delayed entry and discontinuous risk interval. So when are you at risk? And if you're not at risk, that interval of time should actually be in your follow-up period. Okay, we do this a lot. When we're looking at ED visits, we actually find every time they went to the hospital and how many days they were admitted to the hospital, we remove that amount of time from the actual data frame. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so now let's go into the example. So I'm going to walk you through our thought process on looking at this particular question. This is about ED visits in patients with breast cancer undergoing adjuvant chemotherapy. And what we wanted to do is, here's the paper, we wanted to understand if there's an association between symptom screening. So these patients who are diagnosed with cancer, once they go to the cancer clinic, they can actually, patient-reported outcomes, so they can actually report their symptoms, right? So there's 9 symptoms. They get a little survey, and they can actually mark, how they're feeling on each of these 9 symptoms. And that's called ESAS, symptom screening. So through this particular initiative called the Ontario Symptom Management Collaborative, basically when people started in 2007, it wanted to really measure symptoms on patients when they went in for their cancer clinic visit. And the goal was really to improve symptom management through early identification and communicating with the patient. Now, of course, not all patients participate in ESAS, and not even that. Every time they go to the clinic, sometimes they don't feel like filling out the ESAS, right? So we actually don't have information on them at every single clinic visit. So we want to keep track of that. So what's our main objective? We want to understand if being screened with ESAS, so getting symptom screening, if that actually somehow is the marker for better symptom management. And if that's the case, maybe it actually reduces the rate of ED visits among women with breast cancer receiving adjuvant chemotherapy during their chemotherapy course. So that was the objective, and our hypothesis was that individuals who were screened with ESAS and were part of the screening initiative, they would have a lower rate of ED visits compared to those who were not screened with ESAS. So study design, this is a retrospective Ontario-wide cohort study using linked admin databases. All our linkage was done at ICIS and also analyzed at ICIS. Here's just a snippet of some of the databases we used. So obviously we had to record symptom status, so that's from the SMRD. We did information on ED visits. We also needed information on hospitalization because we wanted to remove the hospitalization stay from the analysis. Obviously we need the OCR for cancer diagnosis. So here's a bunch of databases that we use. All right, inclusion criteria. Just very briefly, here are some of them. You have to be either female, of course, have to be at least 18 years of age. They're diagnosed between 2007 and 2009, it's older. It started in 2007, this initiative. They're diagnosed with stage 1 to 3 cancer, and they received adjuvant chemotherapy within 6 months of diagnosis. So they were excluded if they didn't have a valid ORF number, and if they had a history of cancer preceding the actual study entry. Because they had multiple cancers before that. All right. So here is a typical observation window for a woman. So as soon as she has chemo, she would enter the study. The observation window starts on that first day of chemo, and then it ends 30 days after the last day of chemotherapy. We wanted a really homogeneous cohort. We wanted the actual follow-up period to be similar for most women. So this was the observation window. Now, what kind of covariates did we have? Our main exposure was ESAS, so symptom screening. So were they exposed to ESAS? We wanted to control for the covariates you see in the middle box. So we wanted to control for age, their income, their limb, their comorbidity, stage, the type of chemo, so docetaxel, number of visits to radiation oncologists, the number of visits for chemotherapy, their chemotherapy provider, other types of visits. Everything you see in red are time-varying covariates. So basically, every time there was a change in one of these, we'd update it over time. Everything in black is fixed, and it was just gathered at baseline. And then the outcome, of course, is ED visits, and we're capturing that in instantaneous time. So we have our main exposure, what we're controlling for, outcome, which is repeated over time, and then a bunch of time-varying measures. So I wanted to tell you, I will share with you how we operationalize ESAS and all the time-varying exposures, because there's so many ways to do it, right? So hypothetical patient 1. The legend, by the way, if you see a blue around the box, that means they got docetaxel at that clinic visit. And if you see a gray, it means that they actually got an ESAS done at clinic visit. So they get chemo, that's when they enter the study. Then they actually have an ED visit. Okay, so that's the outcome. And then they have a clinic visit, and at that clinic visit, it's gray, so ESAS was done during that clinic visit. Then they have the second round of chemo. They have another clinic visit where there was no ESAS done and no docetaxel was received. They have another ED visit now. They have third chemo, and during that visit, ESAS was done and they did receive docetaxel. They had another clinic visit where ESAS was done, and they had another ED visit here. Okay? So that's our observation window because it ends 30 days after last chemo. All right. Now, what do we do? Okay. What does this illustration imply first? Well, that a woman's status of ESAS screening, so when she has ESAS, and the rate of ED visits, it varies tremendously, not just within a woman, but across all women, right? Because then you have another woman, a hypothetical patient too, nothing happens, right? No ESAS, no type of docetaxel. They basically had first chemo, a bunch of chemos, and that's it. Okay, it's a lot of variation. So what do we do? All right, here's challenge one. The outcome is ED visits, and we need to be able to account for the fact that it's repeated over time. So what are we going to do for this? We're going to implement an Anderson-Gill recurrent event regression model, and that's the solution to challenge number one. That's what I'll call it. Challenge number two is that capturing ESAS screening is not straightforward, right? Many women don't even receive ESAS at their first chemo visit, and many women don't receive it at all, or they receive it multiple times, but the gap time is so wide. So how do we actually capture ESAS in the model as a time-varying measure? So that's the question, what type of time-varying measure is it? Because remember, the benefit, by the way, of these recurrent event models is you're going through all the labor now of restructuring your data with all these start-stop notations, right? You're creating a large data frame where you're capturing all the new events that are happening. You might as well use that opportunity to actually update your covariates as well, right? You're already setting yourself up for that large data structure. So it's a good time to be able to update covariates if you so please, right? If you want baseline measures, you want to do a prediction, that's totally fine. But if you feel like updating your covariates will give you more information, it's a good time to do it. Okay. So going back to this example, the first thing we did is we first treated ESAS as binary. And what do I mean by that? Is it's not going to be a fixed binary covariate. So the answer to that is no. What we do is we actually turn on ESAS, think of it as an indicator. So at time 0, which is the first chemo, the indicator's off because they haven't received ESAS yet. As soon as they receive ESAS, we turn the indicator on. And when it's binary, we just leave it on for the entire period because now they've been exposed to ESAS. And presumably, once you've been exposed, we do see that they go in for more ESAS visits. So that's one way to do it. Now, another way to do it is to think of it as a counter. Well, why not, instead of turning the indicator on, why not count the number of ESAS visits that happen throughout the individual's observation period and actually update that over time? So what does that mean? That at time 0, the counter is 0. They haven't had any yet. As soon as they get an ESAS visit, their counter goes to 1. Then it goes to 2. Then it goes to 3, and so forth. It's going to give you a different interpretation, right? In the binary case, it's going to say, at any given time, somebody who's been exposed to ESAS has a X% rate of ED visits compared to somebody who at that time has not been exposed. If you do it this way, as a counter, it's going to be telling you for each, at any given time, for each additional ESAS that you've had in the past, what is the increase in your rate or decrease in the rate of ED visits for somebody who's had maybe 1 less or 2 less, whatever your comparison is. Okay? All right. And then, remember, one of the first things that we do is create this NCS plot, right? And this is what it's showing us. It's showing us that people who have not been exposed to ESAS, that their rate of ED visits is higher. And that actually stays throughout the course of observation. So the x-axis is the days in the observation window, and the y-axis is the MCF, is the cumulative function, and it's actually telling you that being exposed to ESAS is beneficial for decreasing the rate of ED. There's some link there. This is obviously not causal, there's an association there. Okay. Then we ran univariate Anderson-Gill models and then multivariable Anderson-Gill models. We ran the multivariable 2 ways, using a binary time-dependent exposure for ESAS and using a counter time-dependent exposure for ESAS. And here's what we find. Let's see, going back, yes. So just being exposed to ESAS, we saw an association, so a decrease in your rate of ED visits by 43%. And remember, we are accounting for the fact that, you know, like the number of prior visits to a RADONC, the number of CT visits, the number of visits to your chemotherapy provider. We're even accounting for prior number of ED visits. So we are accounting for history here as well. But even after adjusting for all this, we're still seeing that there's a link, that there is some type of association between being exposed to ESAS, which could just be a marker for better symptom management, and a decrease in the rate of ED visits.
So you said before that when someone is hospitalized,
yeah,
you would take this time out.
Yes.
How can you? I'm unsure as to how can you interpret, or I don't understand how you can interpret this number in absence of this, because it might be that you are actually at a high risk of hospitalization, and that's why you see lower ED visits.
Yes.
Right? Because you're no more at risk of ED visits.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Now, by taking it out, all this is saying, the interpretation of this is still the same. You're just saying that at any given time, right, somebody who has who's had prior exposure to ESAS versus somebody who has not at that given time has a 42% lower rate. Now, I agree with you. If you actually want to map out hospitalization, people have done that using another state. So think of ED visits and think of hospitalization. Yeah.
But the inference would be that there's a reduction in ED visits.
Yes.
And you don't know whether that means a higher hospitalization or it means a better
outcome. Not for this, exactly, not for this. We'd have to look into that further. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. If you treated ESAS as continuous now, you still see some type of marker there. You see some type of association for each additional ESAS. And we found this surprising, but it was so impactful. There's a 17% rate of reduction in your rate of ED. Okay.
Can I just ask you, is ESAS generic or disease specific?
It's generic. Yeah, right now it's generic. I think they're tailoring some to particular cancer types, but right now it's generic.
Why did you choose that instrument?
It's a validated tool, and it was, clinicians wanted to understand if it was impactful. Like, I think the government spent a lot of money on ESAS, so I think they want to know if it actually has any type of impact on ED or reducing hospitalization.
It measures the most common symptoms across the most common treatments for the most common cancers. So it's a very wide sample.
So it's not breast cancer specific?
Oh, not at all. No, it measures
that's
things like pain and shortness of breath and so on. It's 10 or 12 key symptoms. You can summarize to give you a total distress.
But it's not different for each type of cancer, right?
No, it's standardized.
Yeah.
And it's end of life. So it's not all, but
It's not end of life.
It's kind of focused on
No, for anybody who has cancer, it's not just end of life.
Well, it's not targeted at end of life, but if you look at the distribution of symptoms, I mean, who has fatigue, who has pain, I mean, these are the symptoms that you see much later in the cancer trajectory than you see immediately post-diagnosis.
But we do have measurements. I guess there's something measured regardless from that.
No, they're being measured throughout the cancer trajectory, but I mean, that's part of the problems with the way this was conceptualized from the beginning.
Yeah.
It shows an instrument that has a distribution of symptoms that are really at the end of the cancer.
Yeah, no. It's a really good point. Yeah, I guess it started off with lung cancer patients first, right, back in 2007, and apparently the uptake has been quite high. But, yeah.
And just seeing as we're on the instrument, were you treating breast cancer, you said stage 1 to 4
to 3
as a uniform group? I mean, that was the selection criteria.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So I guess I'm just worried that contains such a large number of CISs which are not cancer in first.
Yes, and we actually have updated data that I didn't talk about here. We've looked at the impact of ESAS by stage and by phase of care as well. It's actually most impactful in the stage 3. Yeah, in the higher the stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just in terms of ESAS exposure, you consider once they are exposed, you have considered they have been exposed by the end of the study. They're exposed.
Yeah, we did it 2 ways. You're right. So we look. So once they're exposed to ESAS, once they've had an assessment, we turn the indicator on, which means we consider them exposed for the rest of the period. But then we also did it as a counter. So every time they had an ESAS, their counter went up. So we can understand the association between the frequency of ESAS and the actual outcome. Yeah. All right. What was the last thing? Oh yes. So. Remember that all these models can account for prior history, right? Because people accumulate history of outcomes as time passes. So we also accounted for at any given time how many number of ED visits have you had thus far. So Peter, back to your question actually, this kind of helps, right? Because now I'm also saying for two people at any given time, conditional on the fact that they have the same profile, which means the same number of ED visits have happened up to that moment in time, right? Here's my relative rate. So I think that does help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I forgot about that. But we do see that the rate is 31% higher. So basically, if you're a user, maybe you should use more. Right? So your rate of using is 31% higher if you pass them to the price. All right. So really, I mean, I've already interpreted the results, but I mean, key is that this is obviously not causal with an association. We're trying to see if it's a marker for something else. And there are more studies being done on whether people with high ESAS pain, then who proceed to get intervention, some type of opioid, if they also, what their customers' use is like after that point. So once there's an intervention involved. There's lots, I mean, there's so much to this, right? So we didn't talk about gap times at all. We didn't talk about frailty models and how to account for heterogeneity or access heterogeneity. There's also the concept of intermittent observation. When, for example, you don't know exactly when the ED visit happened, and that can happen with dirty data. And then the use of multi-state models to analyze recurrent event data. So all these things are a possibility, things to talk about for another day. So that's it. Great. Thank you so much. Any more questions? Yes.
Can we go back to your that data arrangement slide?
What?
Not that one. Data arrangement, the way patients.
Oh, sure. Yeah. 1 second. Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, correct. So here, let's say if the patient has continuous kind of chemotherapy type of treatment, we can see treatment status. For example, let's say if they had the surgery one time,
Yes.
how do we assign after that event? For example, surgery happened one time, right?
Yes.
And the next line, let's say patient 1, if the surgery happened in 100 days, and then the treatment status, what we put 100 to 344. Should you still continue with the treatment as the one? Or?
I think that's up to the clinician. Do they want to understand the impact of surgery on the rate of ED visits? Because then maybe it's another covariate totally. And it's its own binary time-dependent covariate.
Right.
If you wanted to include it within the current treatment, then you'd have to think of treatment as like a multi-categorical variable if you think of it that way. So maybe it's plain treatment, maybe it's treatment plus surgery, and the indicator for whatever's been received so far will go on. So there are lots of ways to do it. But I would believe that, but you always want to ask the docs, what we're going to get from this.
Okay.
Yeah, because it could be that they just want to understand the impact, or maybe just account for surgery, in which case have it as a separate type-of
In that case, if they account for surgery, we'll put only at the time of surgery, then we'll not
You
account.
need another line
Okay.
if there's a change in status. Anytime there's a change in covariate profile or change in outcome profile, you need a new line of data.
Okay.
New line.
I know it's a big topic, but I wonder if you could speak a bit about prediction in the sense of, are these models good for prediction and an interaction between prediction and time-varying covariance?
Right. So my honest answer is that I only use multi-state models to do prediction. I treat recurrent events as a multi-state model because I find the packages are much easier with the multi-state model framework. For time-dependent covariance, it's back to the same issue. How much does it make sense? Is it doable? I usually use baseline measures to do predictions, or like for CN study, we recalculate, right? So basically, for my profile right now, with my prediction of dying in the next year, and then condition that I've survived now 2 years, I have a new profile. What's the probability of, from this point in time, dying in another 2 years? So that is still the way we do it.
You didn't move much into application, but if I'm the director of a program in breast cancer management, for example, summarize for me how your research will help me.
Sure. So I would say that we are finding that there is some type of improved benefit of screening individuals for symptoms over time. And we think that maybe we need to find out why we see the benefit. Is it based on particular physician characteristics? Maybe there's an intervention that's happening. We really need to tease out what's happening after the screening is done that's linked with why we're seeing a reduction in ESAT and ED.
You don't think it's the obvious thing that leads to treatment of a particular symptom?
Well, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, but I think we need to show that. Yes.
If you take the analogy of composite outcomes in other settings where you might have, which of these happens first, death or revascularization, blah, blah, blah. You could do the same thing with recurrent event models if you are weighing them equally. Presumably that if you have multiple events that could recur, emergency room visit, hospitalization, need for new drugs, and if you're weighing them equally, you could still use the standard recurrent event approach.
Yeah.
What if you want to weigh them unequally, or can you then break them down into composite parts? Or people doing that when you want to look at each individual item within the composite endpoint?
Yeah, so people, you're right, if you want to think of ED visits or hospitalizations, you can think of like a recurrent event model where that is the outcome itself, right? But if you want to tease out what's happening, I think we're back to this multi-state framework. So that's like the next step up, where now we have a bunch of states for ED visits, and we have a bunch of states for hospitalizations. Because you could picture, not only are your ED visits happening like one by one, but from one ED visit you go to hospitalization, then you go to your second ED visit, then you go to your second hospitalization, then maybe you go to ED visit 3, ED visit 4, and your hospitalization 3. So your trajectory to map that all out, I think, is